Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life.
The news breaking out of those prison walls is unlike anything we've heard so far about Sean Diddy Combs. This is not the glamorous world of flashing cameras, tailored suits, and million-dollar deals. This is the raw, unfiltered reality of a man stripped of everything that once made him untouchable.
Jail. I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. I think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations, that's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard. By the way, it's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult long-term girlfriend as part of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated under the Mann Act. Combs and 2 of his longtime girlfriends had a private, intimate life that is not uncommon today. They're talking about Jane and Cassie Ventura. Quote, it may not have been common on June 25th, 1910, when the Mann Act, or as it was originally called, the White Slave Traffic Act, was passed, but attitudes about sex
The man who once dictated the pace of entire industries is now begging, literally begging, for an immediate release. And the reason? A violent, targeted prison attack that didn't just leave physical marks but shattered him emotionally in a way no courtroom verdict could. From the moment he was booked into this high-security facility, Diddy wasn't treated like the mogul the public once idolized. In here, he's not a celebrity, he's just another inmate. And in this place, the rules are different. Fame doesn't buy you respect. In fact, it can put a target on your back. Every person locked behind those walls knows who he is, knows his history, and for some, taking down a man like that is a badge of honor. The moment he walked in, eyes were on him, not out of admiration, but calculation. Inmates whispered in the corners, sizing him up. Some were curious, some envious, others openly hostile. And in a place where status is determined by strength and fear, there's always someone ready to make a statement. Diddy, whether he realized it or not, was living on borrowed time the moment he stepped through those gates. It happened in the yard. Prison yards have their own rhythm, their own unspoken laws. People walk laps, trade contraband, work out, talk in small circles. The guards.
This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were, serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts
Patrol, but they can't be everywhere at once. And there are always spots, blind corners, shaded areas, where things can go down fast. On this day, the air was thick with tension. Diddy was there, trying to blend in, moving low-key. But there's no such thing as blending in when your face is one of the most recognizable in the world. The attack wasn't a random outburst. It was deliberate. The kind of move that's planned days in advance. A small group closed in, moving with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly what they're about to do. The first blow came from the side, unexpected, hard enough to throw him off balance. And then they were on him. Fists, knees, boots, all landing with brutal precision. In the chaos, shouts erupted, some encouraging, some warning. But the blows kept coming. The ground was cold against his back as he tried to shield himself, but in here, once it starts, you don't stop it. Every hit stripped away another layer of the image he'd carried his whole life. In that moment, there was no business mogul, no superstar, no king of the city, just a man outnumbered, overpowered, and completely vulnerable. By the time the guards got there, the damage was done. His face was swollen, his lips split, his clothes smeared with dirt and blood. But the injuries weren't the worst part, it was his eyes.
And their family are incredible abuse, bizarre things that were going on. And yet from that child's perspective, it was normal. I mean, I can remember one interview that I had with somebody and I was asking him about physical abuse. And he's like, no, I didn't have any in my family. And then I realized early on that I was going to have to change that question for people and ask about specific behaviors, because oftentimes there was this lack of recognition that this was abuse. This was normal to them. And so unless I ask about specific behaviors, I might not get the answer that I thought I was getting, or I was misinterpreting that. And so, children do think of things as normal in their family. And so other adults who are not involved in that situation might look at it and go, this is abusive. This is exploitive of children for them to be exposed to that. But for that child, this is normal. This is a normal Saturday night. This is what I grew up seeing and being exposed to.
And I know when like the lawsuits had first started coming out against Sean Diddy Combs, a lot of people were kind of wondering, how did Diddy become this way or get this way? Obviously there's also, that power dynamic that we could also kind of attribute to the allegations that have been made against him as well too. But do you also think that being exposed to sex and this at this very young age during a very developmental time in his life, do you think this may have attributed to kind of his thoughts and thinking about sex in terms of, maybe in his mind, maybe he thinks that women or men are just objects, and that, sex is just possibly transactional, that type of thing. But what do you think this exposure kind of did to him? Do you think that kind of attributed to him becoming the way he did?
I think there are two really interesting parts of that. One is our early exposure to sex, both in terms of what we're taught as well as what we experience, certainly shapes our understanding of sex, our understanding of the context of how sex is supposed to be, what kind of relationship it's likely to involve, and those kinds of things. If we witness a parent having sex casually, then we start thinking this is how you have sex. But I think another question that we just can't ignore is the fact as a role of power. Because one question is, how does somebody become the way they are? And then another question is, how are they allowed to stay the way that they are? And I think that also speaks to this kind of, lack of accountability or lack of consequences for individuals who begin to abuse power and begin to abuse people. And I think that in many respects is as big of an issue here as anything.
Now, let's just say these allegations or these claims are true about Diddy's mom, for instance. What do you think as far as kind of translating, or not translating, that's probably the wrong word, but kind of seeing that pattern repeat itself when it comes to Diddy's own children? I'm specifically talking about his sons here, where, they have faced their own kind of legal issues as well to Diddy's sons. But do you think it's a far stretch to think that Diddy also exposed his own sons to this at a young age?
There is so much literature and research that talks about this kind of multi-generational passing of not just trauma, but just ideas of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what is acceptable behavior within this family, what is not acceptable behavior. Again, for one family, you take responsibility for your behavior. For another person,
wide, distant, locked somewhere far away from the chaos. People say he didn't say much as they pulled him up, didn't fight back against the guards leading him to the infirmary. He just walked, shoulders slumped, almost in disbelief at what had just happened. Inside the infirmary, he sat silently as medical staff cleaned him up. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the smell of antiseptic filling the air. He didn't look anyone in the eye. Every so often, he'd let out a slow, heavy breath, as if trying to process it. For a man who had lived his life in control of every room, every move, the reality that he was now defenseless hit harder than any punch he'd taken in that yard. And that's when it began, the desperate push for release. Through his lawyers, through every legal channel possible, Diddy started calling for an emergency intervention. His legal team filed motions, citing the attack as proof that his safety couldn't be guaranteed. They argued that his celebrity status made him an unavoidable target, that the system had a duty to protect him. But behind those legal filings was a man no longer thinking about court strategies or public perception. He was thinking about survival.
He's saying that if anything related to any of the cases that the AUSAs were working on, like the Diddy case, if anything like that was seized, they would be told about it. But the search apparently was taking way too long to do, and there were concerns that investigators may not even make it to the jail unit where Combs is being held. So Slavic's declaration reads, Supervisor 2 informed Supervisor 1 that the sweep of the west side of the MDC was taking longer than expected, and it was unclear whether the east side of the MDC would be searched. Supervisor 1 informed Supervisor 2 that in her view, the MDC sweep should include the east side of the MDC as planned, in part because of what the prosecution team had learned regarding the defendant's conduct at the MDC. At the request of Supervisor 2, Supervisor 1 conferred with USAO SDNY senior leadership about the search of the east side of the jail. This conversation included, in substance, that the sweep was taking longer than expected and did not include discussion of the defendant. Thereafter, Supervisor 1 relayed to Supervisor 2 that the position of the USAO SDNY was that the MDC sweep should stick to the original plan to search the entire jail. Supervisor 2 relayed to other personnel present at the MDC in substance that the sweep of Unit 1 should proceed as planned. Now, I want you to pay very careful attention to that because that's something that the defense is going to seize on, that they were directing the Bureau of Prisons on who to search. Okay. AUSA Slavic continues. On or about November 3rd, 2024, following the completion of the MDC sweep, the prosecution team first became aware of Investigator 1's involvement in the MDC sweep through a phone call between myself and Investigator 1. Investigator 1 informed me that he had spent time in the defendant's unit and checked the defendant's bunk area for contraband, including cell phones. Investigator 1 also informed me that he took photographs of certain of the defendant's papers and an address book. Investigator 1 provided a high-level overview of the contents of the BOP notes, including the defendant's plans to discredit possible witnesses and find dirt on people. At the conclusion of the November 3rd, 2023 call, I requested that Investigator 1 send the BOP notes directly to the AUSA leading the filter team, i.e., the team charged with reviewing material that may contain attorney communications or work product. We've talked about this before, but a filter team is not the prosecutors in this case. This is a separate third-party team, goes through the communications, sees what might be privileged and what can and can't be turned over to the prosecutors. So again, the investigator's sworn statement was filed under seal, so we can't see exactly what was said, but the defense team can. And they hit back with a filing of their own, and they have been calling out the prosecution for parts of the declaration that they called, quote, remarkably vague. And they say, actually, the U.S. Attorney's Office is proving the defense's point. Combs' defense writes, quote, the declaration.
Sources close to him say he's changed since the attack. The swagger is gone. The sharp, calculating presence he always carried is replaced by a quiet, almost haunted look. He's eating less, speaking less, staying inside his cell whenever he can. He doesn't trust the yard. He doesn't trust the hallways. He doesn't even trust the guards to have his back. Every sound in the night makes him sit up. Every glance from another inmate is a potential threat. But outside the prison, the response has been mixed. His fans, the ones still holding on to the image of the man they grew up listening to, are calling for leniency. They see this as a sign that he's paid enough, that keeping him inside could cost him his life. On the other side, his critics, especially those who've been calling for accountability for years, see no reason why he should be treated differently from anyone else. They argue that danger is part of prison life, and countless inmates endure it without being granted an early exit. The prison administration has made moves to reduce the risk. He's been transferred to a different cell block, one with fewer inmates. His movements are more restricted now. But that doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't erase the knowledge that someone inside was willing to make a move on him, and that there could be others waiting for their turn. In prison, once blood is in the water, it's hard to take it back. And this is what's breaking him. It's not just the attack, it's the knowledge that it could happen again at any time. The man who once ruled over studios, clubs, and boardrooms is now living minute to minute, measuring his days in threats and close calls. His lawyers are pushing for a fast-track hearing. They're talking about constitutional rights, about duty of care, about precedent. But deep down, this isn't about legal arguments, it's about fear. For decades, Diddy built an empire on control. He controlled the music, the business moves, the narrative. He was the one deciding who got in, who got out, who rose, who fell. Now that control is gone. The rules of his old life don't apply here. In prison, there's no entourage, no security detail, no private jet to fly you away when things get too hot. In here, you are what you can defend, and right now, he can't defend much. And that's why the begging feels so raw. It's not a calculated PR move. It's not some stunt to gain sympathy. It's a man stripped of everything, staring down the reality that this place could break him completely if he stays long enough. The bruises will fade, the cuts will heal, but the way his eyes changed after that yard, that doesn't go away. That's the look of someone who's realized the game is different now, and he's not winning. Whether the system will give him what he's asking for remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, this isn't the same Diddy who walked into that prison. That man came in believing he could handle it, believing his name still carried weight. The man asking for release now knows the truth. In here, none of that matters. In here, he's just another inmate waiting for the next move, and praying it doesn't come for him. This is the fall in its purest form. No cameras to smile for, no red carpets to strut down, no headlines to control, just the cold, hard reality of survival. And for Sean Diddy Combs, survival is no longer guaranteed.